What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Health Mastery Show. Today I have on with me Jared Feather from Renaissance Periodization, and we talk all about advanced hypertrophy. So training for hypertrophy for advanced lifters. So a lot of the research that we see being published online is typically in untrained lifters, so people who don't lift whatsoever. And then when they are trained lifters, it's usually like people who are training for 1 to 2 years, and that might not even be like bodybuilding style training. They're just somebody who maybe is being consistent in the gym. So when we're thinking about advanced lifters, like people who've been lifting for 5 years plus and are consistent with it, we don't really have that much data or research on those people. So we kind of talk a little bit around that topic today, and it was a really enjoyable conversation. Before we get into it today, I just want to mention the coaching that I'm offering. I've been offering this for quite a while now, but just want to slip it in here. If you go to healthmastery.co, that's .co, you can find out more details about that there. But without further ado, let's get into this episode with Jared Feather. Yeah, appreciate it, man, for coming on.
Of course, man.
It's good to chat. I think the last time we chatted, I met you at the Mayhem.
Yeah, it might have been Sacramento, right?
that was pretty much a year ago.
Yeah, so, it was almost literally a year ago.
Yeah, that's
very close.
It's pretty cool. Have you been since then? What have you been up to?
Oh, not bad. I enrolled in at UTSA in San Antonio for a semester to knock out some basically prerequisition courses for the didactic curriculum in dietetics. Nice. And then applied to UNLV out here in Vegas for the actual RD program, because once you start an RD program somewhere, you have to finish in that location. And Mike and Crystal moved out here because Crystal's doing her fellowship for sports medicine. And they were like, "You want to move with us?" And I was like, "Yeah, you know what? Fuck it, let's go."
So you've moved to Vegas pretty recently. Are you
literally
Mike and his wife?
About 4 days ago, I think, 4 or 5 days ago. But yeah, this is Vegas is a paradise, man. I didn't realize I'd like it as much as I do. People think of Vegas, think of like the Strip and like kind of like trashy behavior, but like it's pristine, just amazing weather. It's absolutely fucking gorgeous. I love it.
Yeah, I've only been to Vegas once. That was the start of last year, and it was like basically just a piss up. Well, that's what I experienced of it, where we just like stayed awake. I don't even know what time it was.
Yeah. Like the Strip, like strip behavior and just like Sin City. That's what people think about with Vegas. But dude, you make it what it is out here. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be that way. And like our schedules are pretty regimented. Like we train and we get some work done. So right now it's about noon my time, getting work done, and then we go train again because we do 2 days, and then after that we just come back and work some more until bedtime.
Yeah. Is it still lockdown there? Like gyms and stuff?
It's like partial lockdown. The gyms are open.
Okay.
Gyms are open. Restaurants are, half capacity, quote unquote. Yeah. It's awesome. It's great out here.
Yeah. You'll probably end up going to the Olympia then, right? So usually it's September, but
Absolutely.
I think it's December now, so that sucks. But
yeah, we'll probably go for sure. We went last year and sat in the Trifecta like booth and stuff because RP is partial, I believe, partial owner or something like that. Some sort of cooperation with Trifecta that RP has. So Greg invited us out and put us up in a booth and all that fun stuff.
Nice. So before we kind of get into the meat of the conversation, for those who don't know who you are, would you mind just introducing who you are, what you do, etc.?
Yeah, no issue. My name is Jared Feather. I am a sports scientist for Renaissance Periodization. I'm basically their head prep coach for any of the prep clients that we do, as well as co-author for some books. Currently in app development with them as well, and we do some seminars for us, sports science and just things of that nature. We fly around the world and do these seminars. People want us to talk about hypertrophy and dieting and sometimes the psychology of stuff. We have people who work at RP we have a neuroscientist who even does some behavioral analysis type of talks and recovery talks, things of that nature. But yeah, I got my master's degree at UCM in Missouri, which is where I grew up. My master's is in exercise physiology, and then, like I said, I'm currently enrolled in that didactic curriculum to get my RD before I move into a PhD for sports phys.
Nice. So that's like a kind of a pre-introduction course to qualify for it, is it?
The RD.
Yeah, the
So the RD is the registered dietitian.
no, but what you're doing right now, what are you doing right now for that if it doesn't begin yet?
Yeah, so I took those courses at UTSA.
Okay.
They were prerequisite courses just to not, because even with the master's degree level knowledge that you have in one field, doesn't mean you took all the prereq courses for another field. So
Yeah,
nutrition and training are very closely related, but at the same rate, you don't always take the same courses. So I
of
had to
course.
take a
Yeah,
couple to get into the didactic curriculum in the full swing of it all.
yeah, I got you. And you talked about 2-day training, and it kind of leads us into what we want to talk about. It's training for
Sure.
advanced bodybuilders. You're actually a bodybuilder yourself, right? So you won a pro natural card
Right.
a while ago, right? Technically, you're still a pro natural bodybuilder, but I don't know. I don't really know
No,
how that.
so no, it doesn't work that way technically. Like you would renew membership
Oh yeah, I
each
got
year,
you.
and when you renew membership, then you are still pro, right? So the second I crossed over, I stopped renewing my membership. I was like, yo, I'm not going to be competing here anymore, guys. I kind of checked the checklist off and proved to myself that I was, good enough at bodybuilding that I could go pretty far in the NPC, and also smart enough that I can hopefully infiltrate some of the broy science and pass along some of the knowledge that the natural lifters tend to have a little more than the enhanced side. So
Yeah.
sort of just infiltrating that scene, and what that takes is being part of that scene. So once I did that, I stopped renewing the natural pro card. But yeah, I won a natural pro show, and I think I was a pretty good natural bodybuilder. I was about one. I think we were about similar size. How tall are you?
5'11".
5'11", and you were what on stage? You were the heavyweight guy, right?
No, 174, 5 on
Okay,
stage.
yeah, yeah. So I was 5'10", 189 on stage. So
Yeah, that's pretty big.
yeah. Yeah, it was not too bad, I had to go against the big guys though, so that was tough.
Yeah,
But
but they're probably like 10 years older than you or something like that at least.
for sure, yeah, they definitely
Yeah,
were. But it was a good time.
yeah. I actually asked I used to follow like Alberto and a few like Paul Ravella on stuff on
Yeah,
the
yeah, they're
forums.
great
Like,
people.
yeah, I used to follow them on the forums like 2009. Before that, like just on bodybuilding.com. And I remember they used to post like real kind of what was like kind of scientific content then, like what I would have considered at the time. And I asked them like, why do you think that like it's the natural guys that are like more scientific, or they put more thought into that kind of thing, where the top, say, IFBB pros, they're more bro. And his opinion was that like just because when you're a natural, you gotta squeeze everything out of it, where the IFBB pros, it's a lot of them are just, they got such good genetics that they pretty much anything kind of works. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that, and if the top IFBB pros, if they were like natural, they would actually be the top natural pros. In my opinion, I actually think that's true. I think whoever's like really good naturally, they end up being kind of, they see that they have a career in bodybuilding, and obviously that's not really something that's going to happen in natural bodybuilding. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are fortunately natural bodybuilding is becoming more and more prominent, so a lot of guys will stop crossing over. To be honest, I wouldn't have if there weren't so many other pioneers in natural bodybuilding already. But there's so little pioneers sort of pushing the scientific movement onto the enhanced realm that I was like, I think that's one of my callings. I think my genetics are very, very good, and I recognize that. Just like you said, these natural guys, they're like, well, the pinnacle of genetics, and they decide to go enhanced. Generally, people, when they start really early and they get a lot of gains, they're getting big in spite of what they're doing, and it's very easy for one to become sort of egotistical about that, and just to think that you know everything. And when that happens, you get the old guys in the gym sort of chatting in your ear about bodybuilding, and natural bodybuilding wasn't super prominent, so a lot of these guys were like, yeah, bodybuilding, what's that? And they're like, man, you got a good look, you should come try this little substance here, put a little bit of this into your supplementation. And a lot of that is legitimately just indoctrination by the older guys who did the same thing. And I saw it a lot in San Antonio. It really sucked because, dude, I'm almost it sounds really weird to say this, but it's almost like I'm giving up a certain part of myself to tell people not to do that to themselves.
Yeah, you're a martyr, right? You're a martyr.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I try to, it's not just to be like egotistical about it, but it's like, I'm willing to do this to tell more people not to do this. Yeah. And if people are going to do this, because I think it's fine if you do, obviously, do it right, do it smart. And that's the other thing. I'm trying to push it to where it's smart.
I get
to that, it's definitely the kids that saw a lot of gains right out of the gate, and they had the right people around them. I'm sure to say the wrong people. And, just the indoctrination occurred, and they started going and going. There are a lot of guys that did it really well. You had Kai Green, who was natural, got his IFBB Pro card as a natural. You can see some of those pics. Really cool. Half the people don't believe that, but it's the truth. This guy grew up poor. He was in and out of homes. When do you expect this guy to find steroids at? He was just getting big, training hard, enjoying his training, and then you have the West African genetics, and there you go.
Yeah, and Ronnie as well, right? He the same. He won his pro card naturally.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
It's crazy. Like when I think about it, and it's not like I'm not against steroids morally or anything like that. They're not illegal where I am, but I know that the reason I don't want to take them, or at least one of the reasons, is because I wouldn't do any better as a bodybuilder. I'd probably do worse as a bodybuilder enhanced, because there's just a bigger pool of people. I'm doing relatively well as a natural because the pool is smaller. I'm willing to admit that. I don't have the genetics, unless I had some form of crazy reaction like Kevin Levrone response to gear. Then but that's very, very unlikely. But yeah, moving on. So when it comes to training, all right, so there's a lot of research, and the whole community itself, and even the wider fitness community is kind of moving towards science. Like you said, PTs, they talk a lot, like high level science, and a lot of the research is on untrained subjects, or when we talk about trained subjects, we're talking about maybe training a year or 2 years, but there's pretty much nothing that has a big group sample size of bodybuilders, or people who are even training consistently for, say, more than a couple of years, or at least there's very few studies on that. I actually spoke to Brad Schoenfield last week, and so what are your kind of thoughts, I suppose, about that, and then how training for an advanced lifter would differ than somebody who was, say, a newer lifter or an intermediate lifter, and how would you mold some of the science or some of the research that's coming out, and maybe take more of a bro approach? Or when I say bro approach, I mean that there's just no science to validate that yet. What are your thoughts?
Sure. So a lot of the conclusions that we come to are, this is where I really kind of get irritated with the evidence-based community, because they take evidence-based as solely paper, data, statistic-based instead of evidence-based. And it's like, that's fine, we have these studies and they're great, but there are people like myself who dedicated a lot of time to school that learned physiological realities that are in line with sports science, exercise science, etc. Right? Whenever we take into consideration physiological realities, so like over long periods of time with negative feedback loops, general adaptation syndrome, things of this nature, it's like clearly in sports we have a lot of things figured out. So applying sports science to exercise science is probably a pretty good thing. I'm unsure why certain things for one fitness characteristic would be completely just declined and null and void to another fitness characteristic. It should at least be taken.
I lost you there. Oh shit!
Still gone?
I lost you there, man. I don't know if you can hear me, but you dropped
now.
off just after you said you dedicated time to school.
Can you still hear me? Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay,
yeah.
Hopefully it doesn't happen again. So there are people like myself who dedicate their time to school, learning just these physiological realities that in line with, exercise science, sports science, how these things interact, and to, ask for data on concepts that we fully understand physiologically. It's just like, okay, but you didn't use this for advanced people. And it's like, listen, negative feedback loops work like this. So that means that, as you get more advanced, you probably respond less to the same stimuli, yada, yada, yada. So you just put these conjectures on these physiological realities, and, more often than not, the data has to catch up. But that doesn't mean we don't put these conjectures and take them into consideration.
Sure, I got you. So, so the current research that we have is like a lot of these advanced training techniques don't necessarily work, or at least not that they don't work, but they don't have any additional benefits. So like drop sets, supersets, intensity techniques. How do you start to work some of these things into your training? And obviously you split up your training into 2 days. I'd like to know more about that. But when we're looking at the kind of volume landmarks or whatever people kind of talk about the meta-analysis by Brad Schoenfield, they're talking like 10 to 20 sets. I don't suspect you're doing like, a couple sets in the morning and evening. Perhaps you're getting quite up there in the volume.
Sure. So to address the first part of the question, the intensity techniques and things of that nature, fairly certain that the sequestration of metabolites is actually being shown to have its own specific benefit for hypertrophy. So I am unsure that that's actually correct, that it's a bad thing or that it doesn't work. We pretty well understand these mechanisms of hypertrophy, and really the only thing that we're coming the closest to ruling out is that damage causes any sort of growth, Yeah. I don't think we're coming close to saying that metabolites don't cause growth. You can't really have one of these things without the other. If you have a lot of tension at the fiber level, a lot of metabolites are usually sequestered, because there's research to show that sequestering these metabolites does have this sort of independent response. It might be a good idea during training, especially during periods in time when you have been training for a long time and these processes of anabolism and catabolism sort of shift in different directions, and you might need to push the volume a little higher. I think there's plenty out there to support that this is a good idea.
So the metabolites on that, is it that the metabolites cause higher fatigue, and then that in essence then increases mechanical tension because they're recruiting more motor units, or is there an independent effect of increasing metabolites? So for example, blood flow.
I believe there's just an independent. Exactly. So look at all the research on blood flow restriction training. There's an independent effect of another pathway of hypertrophy that occurs. The physiological mechanisms behind that, Brad Schoenfeld would be a great person to talk to about that. And his book probably actually says some things about that. What is exactly signaled to cause this cascading effect for hypertrophy? But yeah, it's definitely been shown. I can touch on the 2-day thing now if you'd like.
Sure.
If you want to be more specific with your question, we can dive into some of the details.
No, go ahead, please. We'll go on from there.
Yeah, so you said something about like doing 2 sets in the morning, 2 sets at night, or whatever. So the setup is, we did an entire podcast about this on Steve Hall's channel, so I'll try not to do too much overlap there, and people can go check that out. But basically, for the most part, doing your primary musculature, so if you're going to do push that day, then I would do like chest, a little bit of front delt work because the pressing hits the front delts obviously. In the AM and in the PM, I would have whatever frequency of lateral delts, biceps, and triceps I'm doing that mesocycle, I would sprinkle that stuff in. So if I'm doing 3 or 4 times a week of lateral delts, biceps, then I would probably put that after my pull and push sessions in the PM, and then have legs for its own day. Sometimes they don't have legs for its own day. I train generally anywhere from 10 to 11 sessions a week, depending where I'm at. The final massing, final cutting mesocycles of the training block are generally like 11 sessions. So, going in, doing like 2 or 3 exercises in the morning of, let's say, horizontal push with like a vertical push, and then going later at night and doing a couple sets of lateral raises, a couple sets of curls, a couple sets of triceps to finish off the pushing session. And then you can sprinkle in the forearms, the traps, the abs, yada yada. These smaller musculatures, you can also sprinkle that stuff in the PM, just so that it's not like you don't feel like it's a waste of time. In the podcast, we definitely emphasize very heavily that 2-day training isn't for everyone. If you are having concerns about schedule conflict, probably not even worth it to you. And it's definitely an interesting thing to check out.
Yeah, and is it purely just for recovery reasons or for time reasons that you spread it out, or just to be more fresh?
So when you try to train a bunch of muscles in the same session, obviously the latter half of the training session can become somewhat less effective in a sense that you use less weight, or the fibers are pretty fatigued, or you're just pretty fatigued in general systemically, so it's just kind of less effective work, and you can sometimes dip into that junk volume range. So whenever you split these up by 4 to 6 to 8 hours or whatever you want to do, you can go into the gym a little more fresh, and the intensity might be able to be used a little bit more intensity too, because you're not super fried from 6 sets of whatever pressing exercises you did, and then try to go do triceps, and your triceps are just kind of fucked.
Yeah, and then I know that RP. I spoke to Mike about this a couple of months ago in terms of increasing volume across a mesocycle or a couple of weeks of training. What are your kind of thoughts on that? I know there's been some other thoughts, or within the fitness industry, from some pretty well regarded people like Greg Nuckols or Eric Helms, etc. They perhaps don't necessarily think it's maybe the best idea in terms of being able to do more volume may just indicate that you're better at doing more volume. How do you set up your training volume, or how would you set it up for somebody who's advanced?
Yeah, so we just put out an article on this. There was sort of we published a paper, there was a rebuttal, we rebutted back, and then there was an article written by Eric and the guys, and then now we just wrote one and put it out as well. So to be honest, this is something that needs to be hashed out further, and I think that getting like a roundtable on here would be a really good idea for the people. But for now, I can just sort of link you to what that article is that we wrote, and you guys can kind of come up with if it's a good idea for yourselves. But it's the expert advice. It's in defense of set increases within a hypertrophy mesocycle on the Renaissance Periodization website. But basically, for an advanced guy, because you asked, the MEV to MRV range changes, so the shifts in sets across the mesocycle might actually be a little less dramatic. MEV to MRV, because you're minimum, like I said, with these negative feedback loops earlier, it might take more as an advanced guy to grow more volume than it did before. So your minimum effective volume before, where you're a beginner, it might have been 2 sets right when you started, then you become intermediate, and it's 6 sets to start. But then whenever you're an advanced guy, well, 6 sets isn't doing shit when you're starting off. So that MEV to MRV range definitely shifts, and that's probably the biggest factor with an advanced athlete. It's just their shifts in volumes come more from rep increases, potentially load increases, and then set increases when we can.
Gotcha. But on a more micro scale across a mesocycle block, does that translate into needing to increase your whatever to keep the same stimulus? You need to increase the number of sets throughout the block. I'm sure you probably addressed this in the article.
Oh, absolutely, very in depth. I think it's definitely a good idea. Yeah, I think that the fitness fatigue paradigm, fatigue is masking performance so much that if you're trying to wait for these performance increases in load, you're kind of just shooting in the dark, and you're not proactively sort of adding these sets so that way you are actually achieving some sort of new stimuli. And because the fatigue is going to mask performance so much, by the end of the mesocycle, if you only try to increase load, you're more than likely just never going to increase load because of the fatigue. So it's you almost have to have some sort of proactive increase in your volume.
Yeah, that makes sense, and obviously I'll check the article out. But so if you were setting up a macro cycle, like a 6-month block or a 4-month block for somebody who's trying to gain muscle, and they're an advanced lifter, how would you initially set that up? Let's say they couldn't train twice a week. There's probably a lot of people who or twice a day. There's probably a lot of people who, unless they have worked for themselves or whatever, can probably train twice a day. So how would you kind of go about that? Would you set up certain phases where you're doing more intensity techniques, like we talked about, using some maybe blood flow restriction or shorter rest periods?
Right. So it really depends. First, I'm going to find this client from mesocycle to mesocycle. I'm going to find their performance or their volume landmarks via their performance and how they're doing with certain exercises. Over the course of 6 months, that's quite a time frame for someone to just be straight massing. So I would never put someone through a 6 month just straight mass. That's first and foremost as far as my periodization would go for a client. I think there's just too much adaptive resistance that builds up that way, and the anabolic catabolic processes shift downward. Like I said, again, we realize physiological realities and we apply these to sports science, and sports science more than likely applies to hypertrophy training as well. There isn't really any convincing evidence that it wouldn't. I don't understand why it wouldn't.
What do you mean? But just on that topic, on that point, a lot of, I suppose, in the natural bodybuilding realm, especially as you get more advanced, it's so gaining muscle gets so slow that typically you'll see advocates of like a year-long bulk or a 2-year-long phase in a surplus without any cuts unless they're necessary. And what kind of anabolic resistance do we see, or slowing down of muscle? I'd love to hear your slowing down of muscle gain. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is actually taken out of context. When people say like, I'm going to be massing for a year, they don't generally mean they're literally massing for a year. When you look at a coach, when he breaks it down, he's actually like throwing in these maintenance periods, resensitization periods, maybe mini cuts, maybe there's a small diet thrown in the middle, even if they're not doing like maintenance periods first or whatever. So I don't think I actually know anybody who would literally just say be hypercaloric for an entire year. Not only are you going to become resistant to the training, you become resistant to the diet. P ratio alteration. So like we wrote about this in the mini cut manual, you're going to just increase your body fat that whole time, and then you're going to be 20% body fat, and the amount of nutrients that are going to go to fat as opposed to building muscle probably is going to decrease. So it might benefit you to throw in these mini cuts or some sort of resensitization period, so that way you can become less anabolic resistant to the training and dieting stimuli. So I think that they're definitely good ideas to throw into the periodization scheme.
Yeah, I mean, with advanced bodybuilders who are like extremely advanced, they're not. Most of them aren't gaining, like literally gaining scale weight for a full year. But it's interesting.
They don't gain scale weight.
They're not like gaining for a full year, right? So they, like you said, when I'm saying a massing phase,
yes.
Yeah. So they're not gaining like 40 pounds of weight in a year. But what's interesting is your thoughts on that anabolic resistance. I'd always thought that the P ratio or the fat to muscle gain ratio only, especially in naturals, only actually starts to become more negative the leaner you get. So unless you're getting to obese levels where you have like, say, insulin sensitivity issues, but if you think about like American football players or sumo wrestlers, those guys are fucking huge. And that's just an interesting thought that I suppose it leads me to look into more research myself.
Yeah. So if you had the mini cut manual, we definitely chat about the P ratio and its context in higher body fats and the worsening of the P ratio. And we have the references are definitely at the end of the chapter.
Nice. You're just trying to sell me everything for more P here in this podcast.
Yeah, it's tough because it's like I would prefer to lead you to a free source or podcast that we've done over this, but I'm unsure that we have. So I think a mini cut podcast is actually something that Steve Hall wants us to do. And then, a lot of these are like, there's all this information's out there for free too, podcasts, etc. But it'd be tough for me to sit here and say episode 106 on who so and so's podcast with so and so. They said blah blah blah. So it's like you can just search around, type in the things that you're curious about, and into Google or YouTube or whatever, and generally you'll find something because people put like annotations and they'll say this is at this minute we talk about this and this. So that generally pops up in a YouTube or Google search because it's right there in the information section. So
yeah. So to go back to our topic of the massing phase, so how long would you do like a 16-week block with somebody, and how would you set that up?
Yeah, generally. So the paradigms are never really, especially for an advanced guy, because advanced guys are generally the bigger, stronger people. I wouldn't really push them much past the 5-to-1 paradigm of training because we do these set increases and we do try to reach that MRV for the supercompensation, which has some research that's coming out to support it pretty well. Once we get there, we can't continue training, obviously, because they're at their MRV. It'd be a terrible idea to try to keep training. You literally can't even recover anymore, and all your resources are going to recovery. They're not going to muscle growth until the deload. So running like a 4-to-1, 5-to-1 paradigm with an advanced athlete, and then doing that until 16 to 20 week mark, By that time, you're going to.
What do you mean by that? I don't know what you mean by 4-to-1 paradigm.
Oh, sorry. So that's paradigm means like an increase in volume and a deload. So the
gotcha.
4 is like the 4 weeks of increasing volume.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
1 is a deload period.
Okay, so like a 5-week mesocycle block with the deload.
Right, correct.
Gotcha.
So a 5-week mesocycle would be a 4-to-1 paradigm. 6-week mesocycle is a 5-to-1 paradigm, et cetera, et cetera.
And how do you work out their minimum effective volumes? I know that you guys use like pump and recovery, pump. But if fatigue is masking your ability to progress or your progression, how do you track performance? Because if somebody does like an AMRAP or something like that, their performance might be down.
Yeah, not in the beginning. So we're starting off the mesocycle fresh off of a deload. So measuring those things is very easy, actually. Yeah. And then you just from there, that's why we like the set increases, because from there you can start increasing up to their maximum adaptive, and it's that value shifting up, and then you get to a point where you've increased enough to where it's probably time for a deload, and there you go, you deload. So to measure MEVs, MRVs for clients, depends if they're new or not. If they're not, then I would check what they've been doing. They tell me a little bit of information about it. And then next I would check, because I'm not just going to take that at face value, I also check technique if this is a new client. So they're like, yeah, I was doing like 30 sets per body part per week. I'm all right, let's look into this a little further, man. Even advanced guys do this, man. I've run into advanced guys that they've quote unquote trained. I'm going to call it working out. They've worked out for 20 years, and you go do a session with them, and it's just like their technique. It's like I don't know how you're feeling it in the muscle at all. You're like a quarter squat, or like you're doing this or that, and I'm like, what are your injuries like? They're like, I don't have injuries. I'm like, okay, so what are you doing? So you can really cut down somebody's training quite a bit. And generally, when I get a new client, I am cutting down their training quite a bit, because most people are training with too much volume, or just enough volume for the range of motion they're doing, but they could get more out of more range of motion, and you fix that. So
yeah.
Starting off with averages is fine with a new client. So if we say like, there's a 6-set average of MEV MEV for like some muscle group, then we could start them there-ish. I could look at data across clients. I have some files like that where this guy, okay, so I take all my clients that are like, 6'2", 6'3", I put them here. And this is how they all felt about it. And now you have an average for that height group for like quads, let's say, because they have more range of motion anyway. I mean, it just really depends. There's multiple ways to go about it, but I generally would just start from averages that we suggest at RP if I don't have previous information about their training and dieting. But once you do get their averages, when you start a massing block, their massing block averages obviously, or their massing block MEV, because you have their information now, is obviously going to be less than their dieting. Because when you diet, it takes more to hold on to tissue, so your MEV actually rises a little bit. So we move into this massing period. Hopefully you can still hear me.
Yeah, I can.
Okay. So we move into this massing period, and we start them off at their, hypercaloric MEV, and we go up and up and up to where we're roughly toward their MRV. Generally, it's like sometimes you don't even get there, you get like 90% there, and it's like, let's take a deload now, because they're like, oh, I'm feeling this and that, there's a twinge here, blah, blah, and the more advanced you get, the more of those you have. So it's like, okay, it's time for a deload, let's do a deload, and then we'll start over. What I'll do is for the next block, we'll run another 4-to-1, 5-to-1, let's say, paradigm. And I look at the all of the information they gave me, like you said earlier, pump, fatigue, soreness post-session, and the performance on the exercises, and we'll keep some of those same variations in for the next massing block. Because if they're doing very well and the performance is good, they're not falling out of rep ranges, you could keep that exercise in if they're really liking it. If not, you can make variations. So then you can just make slight variations in grip or width or, new bar, easy bar on hand rows versus barbell rows, things of that nature. And then you progress in a similar manner. You drop back down MEV because you just came off a deload, and deload has this small resensitization period where your MEV comes back down basically, and you start them off again and you go back up. And then
I'm interested why you guys use soreness if we're kind of starting to understand that soreness isn't necessarily an indicator of.
Well, so soreness is a proxy for how fucked up you are, and if we did too much, because that's going to interfere with growth. So it's the opposite way of thinking about it. It's like, how sore were you after this session? And they're like, a fucking 10. I'm like, okay, well, we're definitely going to stick with 2 sets next week, right? That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not soreness for growth. It's soreness for what's performance going to be like this next week. Because if you try to start it, let's say you start it like an MAV, which is what a lot of guys try to advocate for, I can assure you that if you start at MAV, you're going to be way too fucking sore in every muscle to train the next week.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah, I get you.
It's like, okay, so now we have to say 8 these sets, and you're not going to get as much out of it because we could have, since we just deloaded, trained at MEV and actually got stuff out of it. So it's like, you probably want to do these set increases that way. But then the final massing block, yeah, definitely you could another 5-to-1, let's say, or 4-to-1. You can throw some intensity techniques in the end, and you can keep these in every mesocycle too if you just like them. But I think that this is one thing that with physiological realities that someone's going to be like, where's the study? And I'm just going to be like, well, I learned about this stuff, through 10 years of school. With intensity techniques and sequestration of metabolites, if you do it all the time, there's this, again, negative feedback loop downregulation of this process due to angiogenesis, fiber type shifting, things of that nature. And I think that it's probably a bad idea to keep it in all the time. So I generally throw them in toward the end of a entire block. So a block is multiple mesocycles of the same goal. So the final massing block or final cutting block for a show, especially during contest prep when obviously load is going to be very hard to come by, and now you have to get the volume in somehow.
Yeah, I used it quite a lot actually with at the end of my prep because you're just too fucked up to do too
Absolutely.
heavy, and you can't get a pump regardless of what you do. But I use it with some clients, like you said, towards the end of say a 4-week block. In the end, in the last week of that mesocycle, I'll throw in some sets like failure training and also some intensity techniques like drop sets or
sure.
I have no idea if they're actually making a difference, but I think they're not at least harming them, especially if there's deload coming up, right?
Yeah, right. So then you push them into that sort of super compensation period during the deload. So you're just basically taking them at beyond MRV, and then now you're going to deload, and all that all the nutrients are going to muscle growth instead of recovery because you're not pushing it another week after that, and there you go.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting point that you mentioned about the form and reducing volume. And I think a lot of people that say don't really understand exercise science, and me, I don't really understand it that well. I've read Brad's books and Chris Beard's and stuff.
I'm not an expert in muscle phys or anything. I just I have a master's degree in exercise physiology, and I paid attention fairly well in class, and I know enough that I can make conjecture and I can read data. So
no, I understand that. You kind of made the reference to being able to understand nutrition, and I'm kind of the opposite because I'm doing a master's in nutrition, but it's still I can kind of read papers but not really understand them that well. But it's definitely a fair point when you mentioned about the form, because people who say don't necessarily understand, and I don't expect anybody or most people to understand physiology, but when they just think of volume, all they're thinking about is sets, but they don't think about what's happening at a cellular level, and that's what we're trying to achieve. Not trying to achieve sets, we're trying to achieve physiological
tension at the fiber level is what we're for sure.
So and I put out the Instagram kind of question thing and asked some people about some questions that they wanted to ask you, and one of them was your form. So you've got I suppose when I first started following ORP, I don't know how long ago it was, but you guys, the most noticeable thing was your depth on some of your exercises, squats. So tell us a little bit about that. It looks like I don't know what it looks like. It looks like you're one of those Asian people sitting down collecting food or something. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. So more range of motion is probably better in most circumstances. Outside of injury, if somebody is injured, obviously it's not a good idea to do that. I just made a really cool post yesterday. I kind of got irritated by some things that some IFBB guys said, so I put a little
name and shame.
Yeah, well, we'll keep that to myself. Joints are made to go through those ranges of motions, and the better your range of motion, the more fibers or motor units you tend to recruit. If you're going halfway down on a squat, let's say, some of those fibers in the upper lateral quad or something of that nature, they're just not ever really fully being recruited. And we just think that going through a full range of motion, not only that, it's a clear starting and stopping point. It's the easiest way to progress and track your volume, and it probably leads to the least amount of injuries, especially when you're talking about like leg training. Shearing forces are actually noted to be higher within like a quarter range of motion, slightly less in a parallel, but still pretty bad. And then all the way down, you run into things like compressive and shearing forces start to actually flip kind of, because they have this relationship, and you're actually safer. So it's better to sort of go through this full range of motion, and it's safer to go through these full ranges of motion, and there's literature support that it helps to strengthen the joint connective tissues in the area. So not only is it safer, but you recruit more motor units, you kind of get more out of the volume you're doing. It's easier to create that sort of mind-muscle connection with that tension fiber relationship that we want. And I don't really ever see a point in time in which it's good to cut your depth, cut your range of motion on any exercise, unless you have an injury or unless there's pain literally during the exercise. And all you have to do when that occurs is put somebody in a biomechanically advantageous position for their anthropometry. So if somebody, their hips, when they squat down, they feel weird, but then you look at their squat, and like their whole life, they're like, I just can't squat. But then you look at their squat, and it's like feet forward, ass goes backwards. There's no equal pressure in the toes. Their toes aren't pointed out. Their hips aren't even opening when they squat down, et cetera, et cetera. There's just so many things that you can fix. Like Quinn Hinnick, this is a quote from Quinn Hinnick, who's a sports physical therapist that I got to do an internship under when I did an internship with JTS. He said I have the worst ankle mobility he has ever seen. So when people squat and they're like, oh, how do you get that mobility? I'm like, dude, you have no idea. My ankle mobility is complete shit. I have to wear an inch heel lift on my weightlifting shoes.
Well, like high heels.
Yes, for sure. So it's like really assessing somebody's technique is first and foremost, and trying to get them into these fuller, deeper, better ranges of motion is the first thing that I'll do for sure. And not only range of motion, but just actually paying attention to technique and not just kind of moving weight around. So like you'll see somebody who like Pendley rows and they're like, how are these for bent rows? And it's like great, 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 and then they get to the navel and then they just drop the bar with it in their hands. Same thing with deadlifts.
Yeah.
And you're like, there's an entire contraction there that we're missing out on. It's called the eccentric phase.
Yeah, I see that with you know, like in the UK there's a big like following of Jordan Peters, he's a big unit, like a ball of muscle. Like he trains like kind of Branch Warren style kind of, but like there's people who are like my weight or like even lighter than me, smaller than me, like natural guys, and they're doing like bent rows of like 140 kilos, whatever that is in pounds, and I'm like, what the fuck? That's like, how are you doing a bent row with that? I can barely like get like 90 kilos with good form. And,
right.
I think it's just people have this idea that...
Then you look at their technique and it's complete shit.
Yeah, it's just a complete eccentric, or oblique concentric. But do you think there's any benefit at all to doing that? I guess we can't have some research with the studies, right? So heavier...
I think if there's benefit to it, then the downfalls far outweigh the benefits. I'm fairly confident in saying there's probably no benefit in ever jerking weight around like that. I think it's kind of ignorant. It's a little myopic and short-ended thinking. And I just mean in general. I'm not saying that about anybody specific. I just mean in general, this is a bad idea.
Just the injury part.
Yeah, for sure. Very injurious. Yeah. And we know that. Research with like weightlifting, powerlifting versus bodybuilding style training, we know that going heavier is more injurious. And if you can get more tension at the fiber level out of actually controlling the intensity, the controlling the range of motion, controlling the eccentric concentric phase, I don't understand why you wouldn't. Like if you could put 5 pounds on my back and tell me that I can get the same benefit of hypertrophy as opposed to 400, then I would probably do that. I would probably do that. I would not quarter squat 400, and I could be doing 135 full range of motion.
It's definitely more beneficial when you can actually engage the muscle properly with lighter weight.
Absolutely.
Do you kind of prescribe any kind of tempos or like, I suppose, like do you ever give people tempos like 3, 0, 1, 1? I remember like back in the day when I say back in the day, I mean like 7 years ago. But like when I did my first show, Matt Jansen actually was my coach. Funnily enough, it was like he was up and coming, and he was really big on these like hold the contraction for 2 seconds. This one for 1 second.
Right.
This one's like 4 seconds. I'm sure his like methodology has changed over time, but
Sure.
There's a point, I guess, where you can go like too form heavy, where you're actually just like basically moving with a weight that's so light that it's like, what are your
sure.
thoughts?
I think the tempo thing was a really good idea that bodybuilders back in the day thought of to standardize technique. Again, that's another good reason for range of motion, standardizing technique. If anybody takes anything away from this podcast, hopefully it is the word standardize your technique. I think that generally just telling somebody, control the eccentric, have a forceful concentric, and if you'd like to squeeze the peak contraction at the top for a second, that's good. So that might look like bent over row is like touch the stomach. Oh, squeeze down, slow. You can count to like 2 or 3 in your head. Light tap. Back up, same thing, over and over. So there are oftentimes, for some exercises that I notice people have really poor technique, I will put tempo things next to them. So if I saw a client's technique, it was a straight leg deadlift, and everything about their straight leg deadlift was beautiful, except that their eccentric was like completely uncontrolled. I'll be like, okay, here you go. This is what I want you to do. I want you to count to 3 in your head as you lower the bar on your eccentric phase. I don't know if I would ever put like a 1, 2, 1 tempo thing, like 1, squeeze 2, 1, but I would definitely explain, here's what I would like you to do. 1, 2, that's just like 1, 2, 1 is like a way of like coming up with a vernacular that tells people to do that. So I'm more of an explanatory person in that sense. Like, okay, listen, we need to squeeze this peak contraction for a second, and we need to lower the bar for 3 seconds.
Yeah, I think if you put a number on it and it's different throughout the session, I think people can focus too much on counting the number in their head rather than focusing on the actual set. So to before we jump into just a few quick questions from followers or whatever, I want to ask you. I asked this to Jackson Pios as well. I don't know if you know him, but do you think training training should be any different for enhanced lifters versus natural?
No.
Not at all.
No, I think that your recovery capabilities goes up, which means you have an even larger range between your minimum effective volume and maximum recoverable volume. I think the second somebody goes enhanced, one of the things you have to be very, very, very weary of is trying to go too heavy too soon because you get stronger.
Joints and shit, yeah.
Correct, yeah, connective tissues. I will say this. Okay, I'm not going to say no entirely. That was a bad absolute, I guess. Because there are these little nuances that people don't understand or know of. So I'm going to tell people this because it's something that I used to coach enhanced people and didn't really have a good understanding of this until I do now. There are little things like this that always occur, okay? There have been points and times when I will have a lower back pump so bad that if you told me to get under a bar and squat, I would die. I would fall the fuck over and die. And I'm talking about like just from walking to the gym to get my session started. So there are things like that if you put an enhanced guy in a massing phase and he's on like a lot of shit and he's just super heavy, and you say, all right, you need to do 5 top sets of squats and then 2 down sets of squats, that dude is getting through 1 set of squats before he gives the fuck up. So you still need to make sure that the range of motion is very, very good, but there are often times where you're going to have to swap out exercises because they literally just cannot systemically load their back that way. It's just impossible. So there are very small things like that you could change, but as far as like set progression algorithms and intensity versus volume, it's all the same. Muscle growth occurs the same way physiologically. It's just it's occurring at a super physiological rate when you implement these pharmaceuticals. So it's
Do any of the pharmaceuticals elongate the muscle protein synthesis effect of training?
What do you mean?
Like, so when we train like a muscle, we have like local muscle protein synthesis is heightened for, say, 48 hours or maybe a bit longer. But
that's probably a part of the steroids decrease, or they increase your recovery capabilities, right? So that's probably part of it.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
It is. It's really cool. And if anyone's because this is obviously like a natural bodybuilding podcast.
Yeah.
So we learn about that stuff.
Hate non-natties.
Right. Fuck them. Fuck these guys.
We're actually gonna have a march March protest.
God. Oh man. But yeah, if anybody is interested in learning about this stuff, like I was interested in it even as a natural guy, just to learn about it, because it's very cool to look at things at a super physiological level, like even just in medicine. You know, like the way depression medication works and anxiety medication. It's super interesting. It's the same thing with like sports and performance. I was very interested in how making great athletes better, and then like what are some athletes that did the bad thing, and how crazy and how much did they get out of that. So somebody I learned from was Broderick Chavez, and he has a Team Evil GSP website. He does Instagram lives all the time. He's probably one of the smartest men I've ever met in my life. Background in biochemistry and stuff like that. It's super interesting.
Yeah, I've heard of him, but I don't really follow him that much. But definitely, yeah, I've heard that he's a good guy
for
to
sure.
go to.
And even if you're not interested in anabolics, he's just a good guy to go to is for like how these interactions occur at the physiological level, and just learning about biology. Like he's so good at that stuff.
All right, so quick fire Q&A. I'll keep it short. I'll just ask 3 questions. But what's your opinion on the value of a training partner when training? Versus training alone?
That's a good question. I think the training partners, I think they're really good. They're really beneficial. Not only do you have yourself, so like let's take someone for like me and Mike Israetel, for example. We're on the same page when we train. So when my technique, he knows what my technique looks like, and if I lie to myself about a rep, that motherfucker's not going to lie to me for me. He's going to be like, hey, that one looked like shit. Fix this small thing. And when you get into those deeper weeks of the mesocycle, especially when you're in prep, training partners are fantastic. It's very hard to push yourself. And having someone there to not let you kind of pussyfoot around and lie to yourself that you're actually training the way you should is good. Because we have all these metrics and quantitative reasons for like what we're doing and sets and yada yada, it's easy to track that stuff ourselves and just go into the gym and get a good session. And so, if you're somebody who's in a rush and you don't really care for training partners, you don't need one. I think if you're an advanced level bodybuilder or intermediate level bodybuilder and you want to take shit really, really serious, a training partner has its merits. And so does training in a corporate gym and not just in your garage by yourself.
Yeah, no, I think with the caveat there, though, that the training partner is somebody who's like into the same type of training as you. Like they take it seriously. Like my girlfriend always wants to train with me, and I just can't do it. I just got to say no, I can't. Like even if she's doing a similar training program, but I haven't had a proper training partner since I was like 17, which was like more than 10 years ago. Like 10 years ago, and that was like this guy was like 30 something, and he was like a bodybuilder, like a Polish guy he was like a big juiced up guy, and he used to push me like really, really hard, and it was awesome, made him really good progress. But I just haven't been able to find somebody that works on the same schedule, that lives near me, trains the same gym. But that's my kind of opinion.
And another thing to that point, because you just made me think of this. When you have a training partner, that doesn't mean you're doing the same fucking shit, man. Like, if you have similar, well, quote unquote splits, like Mike is 5'6", 250. I am 5'10", 220. His back is 2 times bigger than mine. We're not doing the same fucking volume. We're not doing the same split for our back. So what a training partner is someone that can like go to the gym with you. You guys have similar stuff. You could find someone with your similar metrics to you. But if you are doing the same thing, the same weight, the same blah blah blah, that's just idiotic. I don't know what that is. But that's like what people think about when they think of training partners. Like, yeah, we're gonna go crush legs today. We're all gonna do squats. We're all gonna do.
Well, that's pretty normal. That's what people do.
Right. And you can do that. And like, if you all fall in the same similar, like let's say everyone's doing like push pull legs. You have some lateral delts, biceps, triceps, all the small muscles sprinkled in your program wherever it may be. And you could all definitely do similar exercises if they're working for you. I wouldn't do that just because your training partner is. But so like if you guys both have squats that day, you both have leg press that day, you would just need to modify the volume to what your volume landmarks are, and then you can do it. So your training partner for that day might actually only have – and this is kind of how me and Mike do it, because we do similar exercises. We like similar exercises work for both of us, and we like a lot of the same ones. So maybe he has – because his quads are huge – he has to do for his MEV let's say 4 sets that day. I might only do 3, and then I wait for him to get his 4 set done. We move on to the next exercise. But it's cool because there are people you can definitely do that. But it's definitely harder, like you said, with your girlfriend because she's probably training like upper lower because she recovers a little faster than you do, and she can't do as much volume in a single session. So you're not even on the same days half the time, and she's like over by the chest stuff, doing whatever, and you're doing legs in the corner, like with animal pack gear on.
Yeah, she's not quite a bodybuilder. Yeah, that's why I think that's why it would be like good to have like a Tinder where you like upload your set, you like your workout sessions and your program, and then you like match with somebody to find a training partner. That's
fucking hilarious, dude. That's actually a brilliant idea, and you should probably invent that before I do.
Yeah.
Okay, that's funny.
Next question is, before you do a hard set or a top set, do you prefer to be calm or do you psych yourself up?
Ooh, I have a really good post on psychological arousal and when to use it. I think that earlier on in the mesocycle, especially training like MEV, your main focus, and this is most of the time, should be on perfecting your technique, standardizing your technique, making sure that you're feeling that muscle the way you're supposed to feel it. And if you get into the final week of your training block and you're pretty fatigued, you're with a training partner, you're kind of run down a little bit, you've taken like the max dose of caffeine that you should, and you're just in the gym and you're kind of down, it's time to get to fucking work. It's time to psych yourself up. And yeah, man, I've had to do that as of recent, especially during preps and during like the last little bit of dieting phases. I'll definitely have to go to some some extreme places in my training where I'm kind of psyching myself up big time. But
How do you do that?
Constantly doing that is a bad idea.
Yeah.
And it leads to overreaching a little too early. It can lead to a lot of fatigue unnecessary fatigue that you don't need. Like if you gotta psych yourself up every time you go into the gym, do you even like training?
Yeah.
Are you enjoying it, or you just enjoy like this mental arousal that you get out of it?
Yeah, like a masochist. You'd feel you'd feel like mentally fucked after every session because your nervous system's so turned on.
Yeah, especially with like the psychological arousal that you generally think of, like somebody getting angry before a set or like kind of going to some weird place and you're like, oh shit, what's wrong with you? You want to do that all the time? Like, I'd like to be happy. I don't know. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I know a guy who does powerlifting. Like, I haven't seen him in a while, but he would always smash his head off the bar, but it would nearly always bleed when he does.
Yeah, it's like, all right, man, that's cool. Why don't you just do a better squat with good technique and not do that all the time?
Yeah. Okay, final question. We kind of really touched on this one already, but how big do you think you can get naturally? And when I say you, I mean people in general.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a genetic variant that I can't really attest to it, but I can attest. So I can touch on this point. It's an asymptotic relationship. The quote unquote what is it? What do people call it? The natural limit. There's no natural limit. You will slowly gain muscle as long as you are progressing and training correctly for the rest of your life. Only because you're only going to live to a certain age. There's probably like a cutoff. Like let's say we could live to be 100. If these biological processes work the exact same way, yeah, you're not going to gain muscle all the way to your 100. But you can gain muscle as an older athlete for sure. And your propensity for muscle growth is just different than everybody else's. So I can't sit here and tell you that everybody in their first year of training is going to gain 10 pounds of muscle because that's just not the case. Some people gain 20 like I did. Some people gain 5. It just depends on your genetics. And that first year of training is a pretty good proxy for how good you're going to, or not how good, but how much muscle you're going to be able to put on throughout your career. So if somebody has a less than extreme response, and it's more of an average response, and most people have average responses because that's what an average is. Like let's say somebody puts on 8 pounds of muscle in their first year, they're gonna be able to put on muscle pretty well for their entire training career, and they're gonna enjoy it. Somebody who's is a little below average, it's that first year of training, you recognize that it's like I don't think it's a good idea to give up, and I think you should keep pushing. I think you should continue putting on muscle, and if you want to look good naked, then damn, look good naked, man.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. I was trying to conceptualize how much genetics play a role, but you can't really
God, it's the most.
You can't put a number on it though, because it's just too many
genetics are the
parts.
biggest factor in any of this, man. Like it's like not only so like let's say that guy who gained 20 pounds, like myself. Okay, I'll just say that I gained 20 pounds of muscle, something like that, in my first year of training. I went from 115 pounds to 165 pounds, and I had abs the whole time. That probably is a pretty good proxy for your response in general. So I'm just going to respond better to like a certain type of curl than somebody else would. I'm going to get more muscle in whatever areas. And that same thing goes for like weak and strong points. Like my calves grow if I do one set. Fuck, my calves probably grow if I walk to the gym. Some other guys might have really good genetics everywhere else, but their calves have a hard time growing. So it's like, you never know.
So that's interesting because like it's like do some people have better genetics in some body parts, and
for sure.
have it's just that those who are at the elite level have the best genetics in every area. It's kind of like
the best genetics in enough areas that you can tell they're going to be really good at bodybuilding.
Yeah,
because there are bodybuilders that I know that have no calves at all, and they still do really well.
Dexter Jackson, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. Do you think that like genetics, like if somebody has like good genetics initially when they begin, that they're also going to respond to anabolics like really well as well, or are they completely separate?
That's a good question. I think there's a higher chance of it. Yes, definitely a higher chance.
Yeah. So like for example, like somebody who's like top 10 natural pro in the world, and then they use gear and they're just like a shit pro, but they're not even making it in the pros in NPC, but or vice versa. Someone's like a really shit natural pro, or they're not even a natural pro, but then they take gear and they just balloon up. I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah, there's like just so much nuance behind that question, man, that it's hard to say because there are so many different types of compounds and derivatives of these compounds. And to say somebody's just a shit responder because they took a similar dose to somebody else that maybe they could have just taken a different compound and got a better response out of it. There's just a lot of shit that goes into that. Like anybody's a good responder to farm if they take enough. Anybody's a good responder to farm. If you realize that somebody has shit genetics, they were always naturally skinny, and you put them on like a 19-OR derivative, they're just going to get puffy and balloony, and they're going to gain a lot of weight. It's just going to happen. So that in itself, it's like, what do you want to take? How are you going to take it? You need a coach for this stuff. Half the time, I'm going to tell people, don't do this. It's ridiculous. I don't know why you'd want to do it. Like, outside of like, if you're insecure about yourself and you feel like you've tried everything, I'd still say like, consult with an expert and try to do it naturally. But like I could see how someone's like, I want to take drugs, and I'm like, why? And they're like, well, I've just always been that chubbier kid, and I feel like I want to look really good naked, and I want to get a girlfriend or whatever. And it's like, okay, all right, that makes sense. It's your decision, and I, like you said, there's nothing morally wrong about that. If it's legal where you are and you feel like it's something you want to do because you want to feel better about yourself, I mean, like, why do we buy new clothes? Why do we buy new shoes? Why do yada yada yada? You know what I mean? So it's like, sure, try it.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
It's probably more effective to invest that money into like a pickup coach or something like that to help you approach women.
100 fucking %, dude. 100%.
So thanks for coming on, Jared. What are the plans for you, bodybuilding wise, over the next couple of years?
Yeah, so I've taken this last year off because I'm moving from the classic physique class. Hopefully you can hear me. There's a guy outside my window. Can you hear the lawnmower?
Yeah, it's good though. It's good.
Okay, cool. Damn it, guy. Yeah, so I took this last year off, and I'm taking one more year off because I'm moving from classic physique to open. The classic physique cutoff for my height was like 205, and I had to use like a sauna to get down there. And because I don't know enough about the peaking process behind a farm based strategy, it's like the recompartmentalization of fluids after you get in a sauna. It's like, dude, I have no idea what to do about that. So I don't want to ever have to do that again. And I've gained probably 10 more pounds of muscle this last year, and I plan on gaining another 5 to 8. So that way I can move into the either heavyweight or super heavyweight bodybuilding category, and I'll compete in, this is the first time I said this out loud probably, I'll compete in June or July of next year.
Was that going to be like a local show and then shooting for like nationals or Americans?
Well, so I'm nationally qualified. My first run in the NPC, I became nationally qualified. And I don't know if they're going to honor that also in 2 years because of this coronavirus shit. But they might. So if they do, I'm just going to go straight to national level. But if they don't, I'm going to be doing a show with a lot of my training partners and friends from San Antonio that I met, because they all just kind of want to compete together, be a good time. And we want to bring that camaraderie that natural bodybuilding has. We're trying to bring that to the NPC too. It's like, why are you all such like stuck up assholes backstage? Like, stop being so angry.
Yeah. In nationals, the weight class winner wins a pro card, right?
Yeah, for sure. So
what weight class will you be in then? Light heavy?
It depends on like there are just a lot of factors that go into it. If I were to put a number on it now, I'll be at the top of the heavyweight class. If I'm bone dry and shredded.
Yeah, there's some big boys in nationals. I used to follow that a lot in muscular development.
Yeah, it's very interesting, man. There are some freaks out there. They come from nowhere too. Hopefully, I'm one of those freaks eventually.
Yeah. Anyway, man, thanks so much for coming on. Where can people find more about yourself?
I mostly post on Instagram. I don't get on Facebook too much, but all my shit is just Jared Feather. So I'm starting my YouTube back up for a massing series because people have been requesting that. Just type in Jared Feather. Instagram, just type in Jared Feather. Basically, just type in Jared Feather, you'll find me. Renaissance Periodization website. We have some articles, we have some books, a lot of good stuff, and then that's really it.